There we go. We're live. Boker Tov and good morning. I'm Rabbi Steven Moskowitz of Congregation Lador Vador here on Long Island. And this is Monday Musings. I am joined this morning by Rabbi Leana Moritt. So Leana, great to see you.
Good morning. Boker Tov, great to see you.
Oh, it's so good to be together. Let me formally introduce you now, and then we'll dive right into our topic. I know. So Leana's the Rabbi of Temple Beth-El in Jersey City. You've been there since 2018. Prior to this, you were a rabbi on Roosevelt Island, the congregation of Roosevelt Island. And you were also the director of Jewish outreach at the 92nd Street Y. That sounds so familiar. Oh, that's so great. And I didn't even know this. You're a trained Jewish chaplain. I did know this part. You're also part of a rabbinic couple. Shout out to Rabbi Steven Kushner, your husband.
You inspired me.
Yeah. He's a wonderful photographer, by the way, just a plug for Steve's photography. And of course, you're the mother of three wonderful young men. I remember two of their births, at least, and their brisses, Sammy, Nathan, and Harris. So shout out to your children. Great kids. And I remember this prior to setting out on your Jewish journey and becoming a rabbi, you were also a record producer, which that sounds so quaint because we don't have records anymore, do we? So, yes.
We still have recordings, right? Yeah.
Recordings, but you were 10 years you did that for?
I did that for 10 years, which it used to sound like a long time, but now it's like flash in the pan.
Yeah, it was a while ago, and well, that industry has certainly changed, but that would be a topic for another conversation. So Leana and I met. You were in the first class that I ever taught after becoming a rabbi in December of 1991. I started teaching at the 92nd Street Y. And the 30-week class, Derech Torah, the 30-week introduction to Judaism class. And you were in that very first class that I taught. Such a fond memory. It seems so long ago, December of 1991. What a great class. We're still in touch with many, many of your fellow students. So Leana, you have to sort of tell us. So you started off in that introduction to Judaism class, and now you're a rabbi. Which I don't think either of us expected when you first met with me in my office. To talk
nor anybody else that knew me at that time. You know, there's that old Yiddish expression, people plan, God laughs. That was kind of it. Yeah.
Well, it's a big chuckle then.
Oh, big. God's having a very good time with me. Yes.
So first of all, why don't you take us back? What motivated you to take that class?
Before I do that, I just want to say, people say, how do you go from that to this? And I'm thinking, and I just came up with another way in which they're the same. I was never a morning person. So doing this at 9 o'clock in the morning, it's like, because I love you, Steve.
Oh, thank you.
Right. My office hours at the record business never started until 10 o'clock in the morning, and people would wander in late because we would have late night concerts. And of course, in the rabbinate, we're always doing these late night meetings. So you don't sort of get started until first thing in the morning. Anyway, so I love
we have concerts, late night concerts at my synagogue too. So
yeah. Or, board meetings, very much the same. Right. Right. What was the question? What made me take the class? Is that what you asked me?
Yeah.
What made me take the class? So Harris, who's now much taller and hairier than I am and is a doctor, but he was just born at the time. And I was married to this Jewish guy, and I was Jewish, and neither one of us had been to Hebrew school. Neither one of us had a bar or bat mitzvah. We came from very secular families who, for their own, he was a red diaper baby, good communist family. And my family was a whole nother story, that had really, it rejected the tradition and lived very secular lives, and married. So we found each other. But then when Harris was 6 months old, so two things happened. One, I was bored. I was on maternity leave, and I had stopped working, and I hadn't not worked my entire life. And so I was looking for something to engage me intellectually, or just something that I could do. And I saw this advertisement in the 92nd Street Y Bulletin for an introduction to Judaism for adults. And honestly, this is where I was. I didn't think that adult education in Judaism actually existed. I thought that once you hit 13, that ship sailed, you were done. And it's not like I was pining for it, but I really just didn't know it was a thing. So here it was, it intrigued me that it actually existed. So I was looking for something to do. My husband at the time, he wanted to, I wasn't married to a rabbi at the time. So it's my first husband, long time, we've been friends. My husband at the time, he wanted to take a meditation class, the School of Practical Philosophy. And so we actually did the two at the same time. It was sort of a compromise. Remember that? Yeah. And but the second thing is that
I wasn't teaching the meditation class. We just need to
clarify. But it was a wonderful thing to learn together, which sort of followed me, as you know.
Yes.
And so the other thing is that it really occurred to me that if I was Jewish and my husband was Jewish, then it probably meant that my son was going to be Jewish, but I really had no idea what that meant. I had no idea. And that if we were going to reject the tradition, which certainly we were going to, I mean, if it was good enough for my parents to reject and good enough for his parents to reject, then it was going to be good enough for us to reject. But if we were going to reject it, we should reject it out of knowledge and not out of ignorance. So the plan was to take the class, learn what it was that we were going to reject, and then so that we could reject it with integrity. That was literally the plan. And that's why I say human beings plan, God laughs. And as a testament to your teaching, and probably, a couple of thousand years of wisdom and
could be more on that,
rigor and history and culture and all kinds of other delicious things that got me hooked. It was the first class of clearly many. And yeah, so I am your rabbinic child in a way.
I know, it's just so,
and so as we were talking, you have now got a rabbinic grandchild, because now, were you director of Jewish outreach? Was that your title?
Yeah, it was a different title, but yeah, it was a similar job. Yeah.
Same idea. So not only did I follow in your footsteps in that way, but so I taught and still teach at my congregation an introduction to Judaism for adults. It's one of my favorite things to do still. And one of my students is now in seminary. So that makes you a rabbinic grandfather.
Yeah, it was just such when I remember your ordination, it was so beautiful and it was so moving for me to say, because I remember that moment when you were in the class. And we should also put a little context. Most of your classmates, if not all, were interfaith couples or people studying for conversion. And it was actually, you were one of the few couples where both of you were born Jewish. But I remember hearing what you were saying and just affirming the idea that you wanted to look at this and make any decision with knowledge and understanding. So I think that was wonderful. So you didn't obviously go straight from graduating from Derech Torah to rabbinical school. So there were several things in between. Can you maybe fill in some of those gaps?
Sure. Well, I went back to work in the record business for another, 3 years. Had another 2 babies, but I never stopped studying. And for the first several years, it was an adult ed class here, an adult ed class there, anywhere I could find. And I was living in New York. So of course it was, rich with opportunities. Were you going to ask me something?
Yeah. Is there something that you could pinpoint that you were like, that there was a sort of like a wow moment? Oh, this is so like that's something in the tradition or something that you studied or some text or book that you really, was like, oh, I got to get more of this. So is there anything in particular?
Yeah, there were two things. One was that the more that I studied, and it didn't matter, it was mostly rabbinics. midrash or, a legend or a little Talmud snippet here. I wasn't going to, I wasn't at the level where I could study Talmud and midrash in the original. That came much, much later. But, or even Torah, that it really hit me that people are still the exact same. Like I always thought it's like, oh, people that lived 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, they were like cavemen. They couldn't, they didn't have the same inner workings, or they didn't have the same desires or the same intellect or the same motivations or drives. It just, and the more that I would read, the more that it seemed that the human psyche, motivations, dynamics, culture, people, we haven't changed at all. And that here was this tradition that was really peeling back every layer to really try to figure out how societies, how people, how families, how businesses, organizations can live together in peace and justice and wholeness. And that all of the process that they use to determine this, their criteria for evaluation was still valid. Nothing's changed in human beings and in human motivations. That was one thing. And then the other thing was preparing for my father's death, which was 25 years ago, and just walking the path of a traditional Jewish mourner, and how, again, how it just spoke to the deepest needs of a person in loss, in that shock of, whoa. Yeah. So those two things probably. Yeah.
Yeah, I can, I really resonate with what you said. I mean, both, the sense that we're still asking the same questions, and we're still struggling to come up with, responses, or I wouldn't even call them answers, but just responses to these difficult and challenging questions that we've always been faced. I mean, technology that we're on now is a trapping. It's not an answer to these monumental questions that we've always been asking. And in terms of Jewish mourning rituals, I have seen their power, and I've often said to people that there's a sense that you're falling and you don't know what to do. So just like the tradition provides you with this wonderful to-do list and this just ladder, and just kind of hang on. And just, it's worked for thousands of years. So let's just walk it together, and it will provide some meaning. And I really do, Judaism, when it comes to Jewish mourning rituals, most especially, I just think we have it right. I mean, I know I'm allowed, both of us are rabbis, we're allowed to say, yeah, go team. But it really does seem to work in such a difficult and trying circumstance and time. It carries you through. So I appreciate your affirmation of that. Some might say that literature does the same thing, just classic literature, that Shakespeare does the same thing as midrash, right? Like that's why we read, Chaucer and Shakespeare. Just that's why we read the ancient rabbis, because we've always been asking the same questions and debating them. So it's wonderful. So how did you go from taking all of these classes? And I remember that moment in your life where you were signing up for every class, and it seemed like a different class every night of the week. So how did you, what was the moment that you said, okay, I have to become a rabbi. This is not, it's not deep enough.
Well, two things. And one, you're going to totally relate to this. One is that it was sort of reruns. I hit a point in my adult ed classes. I had taken so many that I was starting to get the same material, and I knew there was more.
So you mean I'm on series one? I'm on season one again? I did that.
Well, not exactly, but I would get the same midrash, or it's the same. It's like, yeah, I've seen this text before. It's like, yeah, I've heard that already. So it was like, okay. So I realized I had to do something differently. but then the
Don't
other
you
thing,
feel that way with though in the book of Leviticus, right where we're at right now? I mean, like, just, it's just like how this middle book, can't we just skip ahead?
yeah, don't tell the bar mitzvah. That's okay.
No, I know. Okay, go ahead. So I'm
Uh,
sorry, I interrupted.
and the other one was underwater.
What do you
I was
mean?
doing laps, right? Because we both
Oh,
are
swimming.
swimming. It was swimming. And so I was never a public speaker at all. Just not my thing, just like I was, behind the scenes, and being a rabbi was obviously a different trip. And my boss in the record business died. That's another Monday musing, but he basically dropped dead on Richard Branson's private island. It was crazy. And and I knew that I had to speak at his funeral. I knew I had to do a eulogy. And when I did that, it told me that like one big sort of psychological hurdle that I had, that wasn't a hurdle anymore. So the thing is that I knew I wanted to keep studying. I didn't care about being a pulpit rabbi. That was not my goal. My life. It's been through a million twists and turns since then. I had 3 young kids. One was still in preschool. I was married. It was just not, being a full-time pulpit rabbi was just not my goal. I wanted to keep learning. I wanted to keep studying, and I wanted to go deeper. And then when I started figuring out where my options were, it was in an academic subject where I had to go, okay, I'm going to do history, or I'm going to do philosophy, or I'm going to do midrash, or I could do a generalist, which was rabbinic school. But then, and that also kept options open for me. Like you do a PhD and you're in academia for the most part, right? Rabbinically, there were different options. So that's really why I went to seminary, because I really wanted to learn, and I wanted to go deeper, and I wanted to be able to have multiple options at the other end, because I figured I probably wasn't going to be going back into the record business. That's like a whole nother conversation.
Well,
and
the
so
record business is, yeah, I don't have many records anymore.
Right. Probably a wise career move, although others people might disagree. I don't know. Yeah. So it was for the deeper learning and for the ability to be able to pivot at different times in a career wise.
Yeah, it's interesting to reflect that rabbinical. I think it's wonderful that you really wanted to learn more, and rabbinic school was the answer. It is interesting to reflect just the short amount of time between when I went to rabbinical school and when you went to rabbinical school. Because when I went to rabbinical school, there really was only one option, it seemed, for rabbis, which was congregational rabbi. There was a few people who went into academia after rabbinical school, but that was this sort of like the small little number here, just to become a congregational rabbi. And that's why when I came to the 92nd Street Y, my friends were like, oh, are you teaching volleyball? I mean, like what happened? So yes, because that was like, no one had done something like that before. I didn't mean for it to be groundbreaking, or sort of I fell into it, but it was groundbreaking in the sense that no one else was doing that at the time. And now there's all these options. Graduates of rabbinical schools and seminaries are doing many, many different things. The congregational rabbinate is just one small example. But I do think to study and to learn Lishma and to want to deepen our knowledge is the most important thing.
Yeah.
So I know that I taught you this Introduction to Judaism class, and at the same time you were taking this meditation class, and you've kind of kept these two sort of pieces in your life, and that you've also you do Jewish chant and Jewish meditation, and you've done a whole bunch of work with that. So I thought it'd be really wonderful since it's the morning, and I'm sorry I woke you up so early, I apologize again, but if you could conclude for us with like a Jewish chant.
I would love to do that. And since it's the morning, as many of you might know, the first thing that we're meant to do, not when we put on tefillin or pray or even go to shul, is that first moment of consciousness is to say Moda Ani, or Mode Ani if you're a guy, and sort of acknowledge that your soul's been returned to you with gratitude. And I have a teacher who would say, greet the day with joy, not oi. So even if it is getting up early. And so Shefa Gold, as many of you may know, mistress of chant and many other things, she actually had a practice of writing a different chant for Moda Ani. She has at least 60 of them. And if you go to her website, you can go. But the reason, I believe, she explained, is because gratitude always will take on a different flavor. And that she wanted to express different flavors with different musical chants. So good to sort of focus on.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So this is one that spoke to me, and it actually, in connecting with you, Steve, it speaks to me musically this morning as well. And I don't usually sing this early in the morning, so you're going to get what you're going to get. So I invite everybody to sort of pull one thing out of the ether that you're feeling gratitude for, and follow me. Moda ani lefanecha, 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 moda ani lefanecha. From the beginning, moda ani lefanecha, moda ani lefanecha.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The morning is filled with thanks and with joy. It's great seeing you, Leana. This is Monday Musings.